Good evening. I'm David Susskind. My guest tonight is opinionated, witty, and whether you agree with him or not, fascinating. His name is Gore Vidal, and he's one of the sharpest observers of the world scene, and he's a staple on this program. We'll begin after this pause. Author, playwright, social commentator, and good friend, Gore Vidal, divides his time between Hollywood, California, and Rome. He's here with us to deliver his annual State of the Union message. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you, David.
Your dream has come true. I've got a touch of laryngitis. So perhaps you can handle it for both of us tonight.
I don't mind that at all. I don't find anything schizophrenic about that at all, David. I've always felt that you were kind of an extension of me up here. You know?
I am, really. And I must say I look forward to your annual visit with great pleasure.
So, you're living in New York now. You're doing this new movie, I gather.
Are you interviewing?
Yes, I'm doing the interview
No. That's not necessary. Listen, as I contemplate the upcoming election struggle between Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, I couldn't help thinking it's time to bring Gore Vidal to the program.
Oh, it may be too late. I mean, my heart sinks at the thought that, a country, there are 225 million people here, and you end up with a grade B actor and a very strange man, Mr. Carter, who he's got some kind of dysfunction. He cannot tell the truth about anything. And of course he ran as the man who was never going to tell a lie. And it is weird that this year, the only person who's really saying anything is a conservative Republican called John Anderson. And we're all grateful to him because he's aware that we're in the 20th century, that we have certain problems. He talks about them. Reagan, he's been making that speech for 30 years now. I ran into Johnny Carson in California, and we were talking about the election. And he said, Reagan's people rang him and said, would you stop making jokes about his dyed hair? He doesn't dye his hair. So he said, okay. Carson said, I'll make one more joke, and then I'll really cut it out. So he went on television. He said, Ronald Reagan does not dye his hair. He bleaches his face. Well, when you get right down to it, that's about all you can say about Reagan, Does he cap his teeth? Has he had a facelift? I mean, there's not one idea. He tells you vaguely, we built the Panama Canal, we should have kept the Panama Canal. He doesn't relate that to all our problems with the third world. And are the people of the country contented with this sort of politics? I don't think so. But they don't get any alternative, and that's why half of them don't vote in elections. And I think it's going to be even less. I think we may have a president one day who's elected by something like a third of the people went to vote, two-thirds stayed home. Then you can't call it a republic then. I don't know what you would call it. An extension of the Chase Manhattan Bank, maybe, with offices in Washington.
A defunct democracy.
A defunct. Well, Benjamin Franklin said, rather wise man, he said, sooner or later every republic becomes a tyranny. And we certainly see signs of that in the United States today. All our secret services, our secret police, the CIA with their new charter, the FBI with their new charter, the omnibus crime bill, which is one of the most dangerous things ever to come before Congress. Our freedoms are being taken from us, and nobody seems to much care. Kennedy is supposedly the liberal candidate, whatever that word means. He is responsible for something, Senate Bill 1722. Which is the most dangerous piece of legislation in my lifetime. And it is trying to codify all around the country the various criminal codes. Well, he practically has knocked the Bill of Rights on its head. Now, he's introduced it in the Senate, and Father Drinan has introduced it in the House of Representatives. Nobody's talking about this bill. If you, let's say, go through a red light, and a policeman comes along with another policeman and says, you went through a red light. And you said, no, I didn't, officer. He says, I've got a witness now. You've just lied. That's 3 years, perjury, for lying to an officer. And he can certainly set you up, as we know. The police tend to do when there are two of them and one of you as witnesses. Now, all these things, this great liberal, Mr. Kennedy, has put in this bill, and no one, as far as I can tell, has ever discussed the thing. I have it right here. I'll read aloud to it slowly for several hours.
No.
No, yes.
Don't do that.
We'd love to hear it.
Before we get to that and other matters, I want to ask you why, if we're closer to 230-odd million people, why do we come down to this miserable choice? Carter and Reagan. I mean,
well, isn't
why?
It perfectly clear that as we change the election laws to make it more possible for the rich and the bad, as represented by Carter or Reagan. I mean, they're essentially the same people who put these candidates up.
Who puts these candidates up?
Well, it's done through a party machinery, which in turn is controlled by very wealthy interests. I mean, I was the first person, heaven help me, to start with a trilateral commission. I worked that one out just before Carter was elected. I found out about it. There are 290 members of the Trilateral Commission, and the three parts of it are Western Europe, United States, Japan, founded by David Rockefeller, another extension of the Chase Manhattan Bank, and the President of the United States was a member, the Vice President, Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, and so on. Mr. John Anderson is also a member of it. Now, these are like-minded politicians who take their orders essentially from the bankers. And it isn't conspiracy. They don't sit there and conspire, which is what the right wing is now thinking. The Trilateral Commission is some sort of place where they sit around and try and enslave good people in the suburbs of Phoenix. They don't conspire. They all think alike. Well, this is why you never get anybody from outside. I mean, I saw Barry Commoner. He came out he's trying to start a new party, Citizens Party, and I lent him my house in Hollywood, and he got together a pretty good group, and I mean, he's talking about real issues. He's talking about the environment. He's talking about alternatives to oil. He's talking about a lot of very important things. He'll have trouble getting on any ballots. He'll have trouble getting people to listen to him because the thing is locked. The solution to the lock is we must change the Constitution. We must get rid of this form of government. It doesn't work. It's just a patchwork. Get rid of the presidency, have a parliamentary government. I mean, look what they did up in Canada. They got rid of Mr. Clark, the prime minister, in 30 minutes of voting in Parliament. They held an election in about 6 weeks, which completely turned Canadian politics all around. I don't think nobody should be allowed to buy time on television. It should all be given free by the networks for 6 weeks, and no campaign should be longer than 6 weeks. Then you might get some decent men in political life. But if you just get these monkeys like Bush and Reagan and so on who are wandering around the country doing little one-minute spots telling you about their resume, about what a superb number of jobs they've held. That's no way to run a country, and there's no way to run this country, and I think people are very discouraged. I am.
Is there any alternative to Reagan and Carter being the choice? I mean, could an independent candidate be launched in the time that remains with all the intricate
Well, there's a
filing,
certain feeling about this year. Is this 1855 or is this 1860? I mean, we're in real trouble. With luck, it's 1860. And that would mean that a principled man, not a great man, but a principled one like Anderson, would start a new party, because in 1855, when the country was in trouble, the Republican Party was started, not just to abolish slavery, but it also started to preserve the Union. And it had a serious view of the world, which was the correct view at that time, most people thought. So if it's 1855, we're in trouble, because that's when they nominated Fremont and nothing happened. If it's 1860, it's when they nominate Lincoln. And Anderson is quite aware of the potential resemblance between himself, a minor legislator from Illinois, which is all Abraham Lincoln was, suddenly proposing himself as a voice of conscience, as somebody who really cares about the country. And I could see with Carter, whom no one likes, I mean, this is the greatest zero we've had since Herbert Hoover. And Reagan, whom anybody who likes him, I mean, really should just be sitting watching the Late Late Show and stay away from politics. So suddenly that you could put Anderson, you'd have a three-way race, and anything could happen.
But he would only be able to get on the ballot in about 30 states.
33 states he can get on, and he has enough electoral votes to win the election, because those are all big states, like New York and Michigan and so on.
California?
California.
What can we do? What could the alarmed citizen do?
Well,
send Anderson money, urge him to run as an independent?
Yeah.
Telegraph him?
I gave him money when he came out to California about 3 months ago. That was
but he's never
very premature.
The Republican nomination.
Oh, no. I mean, the people who nominate presidential candidates in both parties, but particularly the Republican Party, they want to bring back slavery. I mean, you have to come out, and say, well, really, we want slavery back to be nominated, which Reagan will say, and Bush will say anything. And
why is Bush so inept? Why is he so like a marshmallow?
I don't know. There's something wonderfully silly about him. I mean, I kind of like watching Bush because, I mean, that G. Willikers, and it's really rough out there. And
kind of Frank.
And when I was the head of the CIA, and he was the head of everything for about 30 minutes. He was never anywhere long enough to do anything. Maybe he'll just be president for a few days, just elect him for a month. Just so you can have March, and you can throw out the first baseball, and then we're going to get a good management team in here, and you just go, you can be an ex-president, and you can write your memoirs.
That's a lovely idea.
Gosh,
a month of Bush.
A month of Bush. We've been getting years of Bush, if you'll pardon the expression, on this mixed media.
And then, and look at the others. John Connolly is a Neanderthal.
Well, I must say...
And probably not a very honorable one.
Well, I don't know. I miss him. I mean, when you saw those little pig eyes glittering, and that snout going for the money, you could just see him. He was like those pigs in France that go for the truffles, and they go out and their noses go down. That's the way he was with campaign money. He raised more money than anybody's ever seen raised so quickly.
Well, all those oil companies owe him such gratitude. Oh, yes. When he was two-time governor of Texas, he must have done them a lot of favors.
I would think that was a shrewd assessment, David, that he was indeed locked in by the oil interests. But then most of the Congress.
To genial Howard Baker.
Well, genial Howard Baker was just too genial, I guess, out there, and it never seemed very clear to him or to anybody what he was doing in New Hampshire. I mean, he was
so far from Tennessee.
He was far from Tennessee, and he didn't look like he liked it. I like Dole quite a lot.
Dole's got a sense of humor, which is...
Oh, yeah, he's funny, and he's always off the issues, which I like. I mean, he doesn't even pretend to take them on. He's aiming toward a joke off in the margin. Yeah. And he should have been encouraged. Larry Presler, I'm going through the magic names,
South Dakota senator.
Who did not take a bribe and should be president.
Yeah, I mean, that count alone.
That count alone. I've often wondered, what if they tried to bribe all 100 senators? Wouldn't it be embarrassing if all 100 took the bribe? Then what do you do?
No, they wouldn't.
You eliminate the FBI, I suppose.
Yes, I'd eliminate the FBI and all of their repertoire. And certainly Jack Javits would never do such a thing.
Jack, I couldn't imagine Jack or Marion doing anything that was not plausible.
And honorable.
Yeah, and honorable,
We'll be right back for more Gore. Gore, what did all the newspaper pundits mean when they kept referring to John Connolly, as looking so presidential?
I don't know what they meant. Obviously, their ideas of presidential are not yours and mine. I suppose it was the mane of white hair. I always had the sense, that you'd better, hold on to your wallet while shaking the presidential hand. I think also he has a certain resemblance to Lyndon Johnson, who was indeed president for what seemed like 100 years. And it may well be that there's nostalgia for...
He reminded me of Warren Harding more. And he was one of the greats.
Well, he was very likable, Warren Harding. Mrs. Harding was very nice. Warren Harding, my grandfather was leaving the Senate, having lost an election in 1920. And he went in the Senate cloakroom to pick up his gear. He was a blind man from the age of 10. And he suddenly felt this man embraced him. He said, "Who is it?" And he said, "Well, it's just your old friend Warren Harding, who's about to be inaugurated president. God help us all." And gave him a big hug. He said Harding was an awfully nice man, slightly beyond his depth.
Sort of put you in mind of our own
did
president.
You hear that Reagan line? But nobody picked up on this. In New Hampshire, he said, any member of my cabinet, he's talking about Miller and being under a cloud and Carter's cabinet, he said anyone in my cabinet would have to be beyond the appearance of evil. Now think about it. What does that mean? Really evil?
Yeah.
I mean, not just seem to be evil, but really must be up to something awful.
He means not visibly evil.
I think you never know what he means. You don't know what any of them means. I mean, they really just, they sort of go off like those things at Disneyland, the presidents, if you ever jammed one of them.
What would you think of Senator Kennedy and his campaign to date?
Well, I have been avant-garde with Teddy, and that it was not exactly a secret that with an IQ in the middle 90s, you ought not to run for the presidency. Not that it requires enormous brains, but it certainly, if it rains, you should go in.
Are you guessing about his IQ?
No, I've never known him well, but I've certainly been around all that most of my life, and even his own family and friends, Teddy, he'll have a wonderful staff, they used to say all the time. Well, the staff didn't prove to be very good. And then he gets on television with Roger Mudd, and I mean, I can see why, Chappaquiddick would make anybody nervous. They're going to talk about that, but they asked him, "Why do you want to be president?" And he just couldn't think of an answer. Nobody told him, It's a great country, wonderful country, it's just a great country and all that, but, why do you want to be in the White House? What have you done to deserve our votes? No, I think that's kind of a joke. He was coasting, and I think he lost the election with that one performance. Everybody saw, well, there's nobody there.
Oh, it was a stunning debacle.
Also, I don't know if you've ever been in the situation. I never really have, but I can imagine what it's like. I've been on television when I was a candidate, and there were certain things I didn't want to talk about. And always in the back of your mind is, that one's going to come up. It does kind of paralyze you. And if you're on lying, but really lying, I mean, if you notice the way Nixon, who lied all the time, got very breathy toward and this terrible breathy sound, which was just sheer panic, because he never knew what was going to come out of his head, nor did he know what was going to come out of the wings, and if the hook was going to come and remove him. And you feel with Teddy that he's so terrified of certain things in his past being brought up that it's paralyzed him, which is sad in a way, and I feel sorry for him. But that you can't operate very well unless you're at ease with yourself. And that was the great joy about Jack Kennedy, who wasn't much of a president, but he certainly was a great candidate and a very charming man. And Jack was just, somebody asked him once about Nixon, who was being worn out in the campaign of 1960, and Nixon was looking greener and greener and more like the undead. You saw him sleeping at night in a box, in the daytime rather. It came out at night for the television. And he was looking worse and worse, and Jack was just beaming, and somebody said, Jack, well, why is it you're doing so well in this campaign with your bad back and all, and Nixon seems to be falling apart? And Jack said, because I'm the same person every day. He said, it's easy for me. I get up and I'm the same person all day long. Nixon doesn't know who he is when he gets up in the morning. He has to remember what the group is. He has to remember which lies to tell. That's very tiring. And bad for the soul, bad for the republic.
What could he have done about Chappaquiddick? I mean, it is beginning to appear that...
have gone, David, for that weekend.
I know, but...
That's hindsight. No, I don't I don't want to second-guess the kid, but I wouldn't have gone.
Now, if you did go, and that tragedy occurred, and he did what he did, what could you say about it ever that would substantiate his candidacy today?
I think he might have got away with it. Had he appeared presidential in other things, I think he would have been forgiven it. It looked like 15% of the vote would always have been against him for that. That was his negative rating, which has been constant. Then it's now gone up to 25%, which is impossible. If the other things had worked better, I think he could have got around it. But it's just this Gene McCarthy, who's a very funny man. We were talking about politics the other day in California. And Gene never did like any of the Kennedys, and he used to know Jack quite well. And he said the thing about the Kennedys, he said, Jack used to lie to you. Bobby used to tell lies about you. And Teddy tells lies about himself. Now, he said, is this a progression or not? He said, I can't figure this out because we're both Darwinians, we want to know, but, is the breed getting better or worse? Can't tell which, but lying is not a good policy, all in all, and our system now makes it so that everybody is misrepresenting themselves, to say the least, when they're not really indulging in great whoppers. Look at Carter. I mean, that whole UN fiasco. He was going to give it to the Israelis. I mean, and then he saw the reaction. Then he took it all back and made poor Vance carry the load. And then he ends up with both the Arabs and the Israelis angry at him. I mean, that's not good. That's why it's very good to know who you are when you get up in the morning. And I don't think Carter has a notion.
I'm going to come to Carter in a minute. I want to finish this Kennedy issue. What do you think happened at Chappaquiddick? And given the facts, what would you have advised him at that time? They all rushed to Hyannisport to tell him what to say and do.
Well, he was on the telephone for hours, apparently. Has now come to light, which was not known at the inquest. Well, I don't know. There were two lawyers, two friends of his, who were hanging around, Markham and whatever the other guy's name was, and I would have said, go to the police. Say, I've run the car off the road. There's a girl in there. And instead, I mean, she lived for quite a time inside that car. That's what bothers people. I mean, had it's been crashed like that, and she was instantly killed, and he was thrown out in a state of shock, well, that's okay. But the fact that she continued to live is what, turns a lot of people's stomachs. And if he behaves that badly about something like that, I don't want him anywhere near the SAC bombers. I don't want him responding to the Soviet Union's, perhaps an attack on us.
Now, if you could imagine yourself Burke Marshall You are now at Hyannisport. You're saying, now look, you've got to go on television and you've got to make a speech about this whole tragedy. What would you have had him say?
Well, I'll tell you one thing he said that was fatal and could always be taken out and used against him in a campaign. And then I panicked. When he said that, I mean, you just take that out and you use that in any ad of a guy running for president and he's saying, and then I panicked, and you show him, you know, the missiles all ready to go to Russia. And you'll say, we don't want him for president. Well, I would say, when in doubt, tell the truth. And if the truth is too terrible to tell, then quit. Don't continue. He could have a perfectly happy private life without being a senator or a president. It's not written in stars that this peculiar family forever hold high office.
You would have had him tell the truth. Yeah. I was going on to the beach with this young lady.
I was going on the beach, and I was loaded, and I backed the car off the wharf, and the thing upset, and somehow I got out, and I don't know why I didn't report it sooner than I should have. At least that would have covered it. I mean, the lies he told, first of all, he's having difficulty remembering them. I think this is one of the things when he's on with Roger Mudd. I mean, he's so busy thinking about, now, what am I supposed to say when that question comes up, that he can't concentrate on the other questions. So in a sense, it's just immobilized him, and too bad.
Do you think the public is reacting adversely for the traveling about the primary states with Mrs. Kennedy and pretending that it's a lovely marriage and everything is just roses? And
I think the whole thing looks so tragic. I think people feel very sad when they watch the charade of her problems and trying to be a loyal wife, and no Nancy Reagan, she. Did you read that description Alex Coburn wrote in the Village Voice of Ronald Reagan and Nancy? He said that they really resemble now, sort of, he's like an old turtle, you know, he's up like that, with a wattle neck and little bright eyes. He turtles, and she's like a very beautiful, alert lizard with her eyes fixed on his. Every move he makes is like one of those lizards, you know, waiting for the tongue to go and grab the fly. And so I can't look at them now without thinking of the turtle and the lizard, who may well preside over our affairs, God help us.
I've never seen such undisguised adoration. She just is always looking up at him as if he's the valedictorian of the class.
Well, she's perfectly correct, because all she has to do is pick her nose once, or just yawn once, and that will be on the front page of everybody yawning through Ronald's, you know, the 5,000th time she's heard it, speech. But they all have to look loyally at their husbands.
Wouldn't it be marvelous if she really couldn't stand him very much?
Oh, I think...
and she was acting, as she never could act as an actress.
Well, she certainly cues him. You heard that the other day. She did something very funny. He was gassing away about marijuana being the worst thing in the world, you know. It's the old Nixon line, marijuana is a halfway house to something worse. And so he was doing that number, and how it was really more dangerous than cigarettes. And one of the reporters said, well, you don't actually smoke as much marijuana to get the effect as you do cigarettes. So how can it be as dangerous? And Reagan just looked, you know, the turtle looked, and the lizard went into his ear. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know, said Reagan. They're a great team.
If he's had some cosmetic surgery, it's quite a bad job, don't you?
Yeah, usually you start out there and work up, you know. I think he just uses that Grecian formula on the hair, and he does the eyebrows, too, which is a sign of sincerity, you know. Because a lot of people are sloppy, you know, and they just stop right here. He goes right, he does the whole thing all the way down. Sideburns, too.
I think he got a discount operation. I think he had a plastic surgeon that was working for a prize or something.
Yeah, or he could have been a Democrat.
Yeah,
most of them
trying to work his wonders. We'll be back with Gore Vidal in 1 minute. Gore, let's discuss President Carter. Have you ever seen such monumental ineptitude?
Well,
in your mature life?
Well, he's pretty good at ineptitude, yeah. What is odd about him, and I don't understand, he thinks like a campaigner, like a candidate, rather than like a president. For instance, a campaigner can say one thing on Monday in Wichita and reverse himself on Tuesday in Baltimore. He'll say on Monday that he's all for Mr. Volcker of the Fed upping the interest rates, which he did do on a Monday. Then on a Tuesday, he addresses the CIO, and says he's against high interest rates. Now, you can't go from Monday to Tuesday and assume that everybody's forgotten. I mean, they forget in America, but 48 hours, you know, that's the grace period. He's too quick with these lies, and I don't know what's wrong. I don't know why he doesn't put things together. I think he's very hurt by having that ridiculous staff. I think that's really done him in. That these good old boys from Georgia have not really quite got a grasp of what the United States is all about.
You don't think that Jordan is anyone who says Jordan for Jordan, but you don't think he's a profound thinker?
I would say that the depths of his mind would not dampen the hem of your trouser if you walked through it. How you like that for an elaborate, quickly thought-out metaphor?
I rather like it. Charles Curvo back in Atlanta.
And Burt Lance back on trial. And I think there's a whole theory which I will propound, because it seems in character, but it's just a theory. Carter knew a year ago that he would A, be running for president now, B, that Burt Lance would be on trial. And there's a lot of embarrassing stuff for Carter and the warehouse and his loans and so on. It is thought that Carter and Griffin Bell, the then Attorney General, who's very close to the president, got together and they cooked up this so-called ab-scam, because it takes over a year to prepare something like that, in order to have a diversion. So that just as the Lance trial gets really juicy and the president is really getting involved in this thing, and where did that money come from that you used in the campaign, was that for the warehouse and so on, and there are a lot of embarrassing questions, that 5 or 6 members of Congress would have been stung by the FBI, which would, of course, knock the Lance thing right off the front pages, as indeed it did. And I think that he's perfectly capable of that. I think that his team is perfectly capable of that kind of low politics, diversionary politics. But the trial will go on. I think some interesting things are going to come out.
You can't find a word about it in your average newspaper. The Lance trial, miraculously, is gone.
Well,
it's on.
Oh, yeah, but of course, Lance every day brings in, another truckload of documents. Will the jury please look at this? Well, at the beginning of the 21st century, they'll have a trial, a judgment. But Carter's loans will be looked at, and they'll be discussed between now and November. So I think he's worried about that.
Would you give him marks for earnestness? What's good about him?
Well, it beats me. I mean, you see, he came out of a system that shouldn't exist. I mean, there's nothing wrong with him. He's actually rather more intelligent than most people who rise in politics. He's obviously got a first-rate mind. But I don't think he's got quite the right temperament or the right character, and he's over his head. But practically anybody would be over their head. These are problems to which there are no solutions. And he has to keep pretending there are. And, I mean, he's hit with Afghanistan one day, and then something goes wrong in Pakistan another day, and in Bogota they see somebody. So he reels from crisis to crisis without any coherent view of what he wants for the country. He never had any, except that dumb slogan, "Why not the best?" Well, if you want the best, you don't pick Jimmy Carter. I think that's perfectly clear. I mean, his slogan ran against him. He is a totally undistinguished man, and he has proved, as president, to be pretty undistinguished. I think that's the best and the worst you can say about him. And I don't think he's a bad man. But that system shouldn't exist like this. We should have a totally different form of government. And there is a strong movement in the country. I'm talking to a lot of people, and we're going to try to draw up a constitution, a new one. As I say, we've had 3 republics. It's time for the 4th. Our first one was a very loose arrangement, the 13 colonies, and we defeated England. The second one was from the time the Constitution was drawn in, 1789 to 1860.
Lincoln.
And that was the Second Republic, and that was a very loose union. Then Lincoln was the American Bismarck. He was a cold, hard, brilliant man. And he was going to make a great nation state and a great empire. And he said to the South, "You may not leave." And the South said, "We have every right to leave," as they did, constitutionally and judicially. Under law, they had every right to go. And he said, "You're not going." He said, "I have sworn an oath which is registered in heaven to preserve and defend this union, and I will. And if there is to be war, you will make it on me." That's in the first inaugural. Out of that came this powerful, the Union forever, this powerful Union state, this nation state, this empire. And then Teddy Roosevelt comes and gives us the Philippines and Cuba and the Spanish-American War. We're in the empire business. Peak 1945, when we had Franklin Roosevelt and we were world conquerors. Then, since then, the thing has come apart. Now, I think that kind of government that worked to make us a great empire is not going to make us a great civilization. And I'm very ambitious for the United States. So I'd like to see the Fourth Republic and have a different form of government in which the aim would not be conquering everybody on Earth or spreading Coca-Cola in every corner of the Earth, as would be to create a civilization, create decent services for the people, decent education. We've got an educational system now where nobody knows how to read. I mean, as a writer, I feel this poignantly. There isn't going to be anyone around in 100 years to read anybody's books. That's tragic. So there's so much to be done in that area, and to listen to these politicians. This is where Anderson has struck a nerve when he says all they do is repeat all the old nonsense. And everybody nods. They've heard all this, atheistic, monolithic communism. Oh, wow, isn't that awful? We've got to fight them wherever they are. If Zaire falls, Mali falls, I mean, they're still trying to get us overwrought so that the military budget can be increased. So the Fourth Republic is what I'm pushing. And then we won't have Carters at the head of the government.
And it would be a parliamentary democracy. It would be
parliamentary democracy
on England and Canada.
England, Canada, I think a bit more on Switzerland, which is more like us in a funny way, because the Swiss have 4 nationalities in a confined space, and they all sort of hate each other. And they have a cantonal system which gives them great regional diversity and spreads the power around. They elect the leading party has a council of 6 or 7 ministers, or sort of a cabinet, and they rotate the presidency. So each year one of them takes the job and, opens the flower show and visits the sick, and the others do the various ministries. Then they have something which is quite, we should really copy. You have a right within 30 days, the promulgation of any law in the Swiss parliament, to hold a referendum. And you can reverse parliament, which they did not long ago. They tried to increase the taxes, and they called a vote of the whole country, and the tax increase was eliminated. Yeah. That's real democracy.
It would take a heap of doing to get a constitutional convention
to
basically change
if we don't
and alter in a very profound way our system of government. I mean, it would be a government changing itself.
Yes.
There's no parallel for that.
Oh, the governments do. They change themselves generally after a big disaster. The French, who often look upon us as a young and callow nation, I always remind the French that in the 200 years that we've had this republic, it's altered quite a bit, but still the same republic. They've had 5 republics, 2 empires, 2 restorations of the monarchy, all in the same 200-year period. So nations can do it if they want to. It ought not to be done frivolously, which is the French tendency. But, no, I could see people are fed up, and I think it'll come out of economic collapse, which is certainly staring us in the face. We may find that paper currency is worth nothing. Well, people get very thoughtful then about what kind of government has done this to us.
You think collapse is possible? The interest rate is only 19%, and there's only a 20% inflation rate.
Yeah, I know.
And housing starts are down, and no one can afford an automobile, and... do those minor issues
they're just minor. We're in such trouble. And no one has addressed themselves to any of these problems because money problems are mysterious. I mean, nobody understands economics. I generally agree with the person I've heard last. Even Milton Friedman can get me nodding at certain points. Then he starts talking about the invisible hand of the free marketplace. And I don't know why my perversity, I start thinking about an invisible foot. And it's always out in front of you, and it's always tripping you up, And I see the invisible foot being rather more desperate in our affairs than the marketplace. But it's certainly true that you've got a society that is totally out of control. A military budget, was it $165 billion?
No, it's recommended next year. They want an increase to keep up with inflation. It's supposed to be about $200 billion.
Yeah. And, they all talk about cutting the budget and balancing the budget. There's only about 12% of the budget you can touch. The rest of it is servicing the national debt. That's most of it. That's paying the interest on those treasury bonds, which the government keeps borrowing money. The Pentagon is sacred. You're not allowed to. We can only increase that because of our numerous enemies all around the world. And so you have, and then Social Security and so on, so you have about 12% you can play with, and the rest is funded by the Congress. So you'd have to have Congress write laws to reverse themselves. So there's nothing much they can do except do it with mirrors, as Mr. Anderson said. You can always make it look like it's budget, like it's balanced, but it isn't.
Isn't there a lot of fakery in the president's recent statement that he's going to balance the budget in 1981 because the election is in 1980? By the time we get to 1981, there is no hope of balancing that budget, is there?
Of course not. I think with his usual passion for truth, he's just buying time. He won't balance it, and you certainly can't do it when upping the military budget, which, if I were the president, I would cut in half. We don't need all that, and it's nonsense.
Aren't the Russians going to destroy us? Aren't they going to kill us more?
We are more apt to be destroyed by the Pentagon, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the CIA with its $6 billion income, which no senator is allowed really to study where that money goes, the FBI. These are all the elements in the United States and this multiple crime bill that's now facing us. These are the things that are going to take away our liberties. They're going to be talking about Russians over there, and you do your duties as citizens and give us more armaments. And meanwhile, we'll have a police state. And as Benjamin Franklin said, republics become tyrannies, and we will become a tyranny, and it's so clear what's happening. And nobody addresses themselves to it in politics because that's considered cheating. Or it's considered being soft on Russia if you're not strong for the Pentagon budget, which is a lot of nonsense. We've got more than enough to destroy any country on earth many times over. And that's not what the game's about, but that's how they make their money.
But why can you keep fooling the American public and worrying them to death? Because every poll attests to the fact that they want more money for the Pentagon, that they're fearful of the Russians.
Listen, you know, I did a book called 1876, a novel that took place in the year 1876. And I had a lot to write about the election of 76, which was an interesting one. Do you know that communism was an issue in the election of 76, 104 years ago? This is the one specter that the owners of this country used to frighten the people in order to control the people. And since the Russians have absolutely screwed up communism once and for all, so it is now legitimately a bad word. Nobody can look to Russia and say, well, that's a good alternative. It is not a good alternative. But you can certainly look to Sweden, you can look to Denmark, you can look to West Germany, which is far more. You can even look to Switzerland. These societies are able to have national health, something that Kennedy's never been able to get through the Senate, but it's going to cost too much the way he's done it. Every single one of them, without being a tyranny, and without being a wasteful society, with much less inflation rate than we have, with much higher per capita income, we're number 8 in the world now. They have these things. They have a decent educational system. They have decent mass transit. We have none of this. We have the Pentagon, and that's where the money goes. And it's because the politicians are totally corrupt. It's because the Trilateral Commission really does represent the ownership of the country, which is the Chase Manhattan Bank, which are the industrialists, who are in bed with the generals, who are in bed with the congressmen. And it's an infernal circle, and there's no way out.
No way out.
No, bankruptcy is probably going to be the way out.
On that glorious, optimistic note, we take a 1-minute hiatus, and we'll be back with more Gore. In world politics, are we as incredibly naive as we appear?
Well, I think I wouldn't say that the Vatican exactly listens to our rumblings in the United States when they want to take a fix on world affairs. No, I think we've tended to see everything from our point of view, what most people do, most nations do. But I don't think that we've ever understood how other countries are organized. I mean, the Vietnam War was the most tragic series of misapprehensions. First, we didn't know what we were doing there. Secondly, we never bothered to understand what they were all about. We didn't understand that their basic enemy was China, not the West. I mean, there are a lot of things we didn't understand. And I think that one thing that always startles me is with the collapse of education in the United States, except expensive education. But for the average person, the education is a very bad system. You don't learn to read, you don't learn to write, you don't learn to add, subtract. Above all, you don't learn languages. And I would have thought that since 1945, when we became a world empire, the number one empire in the world, I would have thought that automatically the schools would start teaching languages. Teach them Chinese, teach them Japanese. These are allies or potential allies, or certainly people we're going to have to do business with. Teach them Russian. They don't teach any languages. And I have thought and thought, why is the educational system so bad? And I have come to the conclusion that it's what the people who own the country want. They want conformists, they want consumers. They want obedient workers. They don't want to put any brains in those kids' heads. I mean, the kids have the brains, but they're not going to develop them. And it's just eerie. You don't go on year after year with such a terrible system. One of the reasons that I have had such a success with my historical novels was that I was able, in books like Burr in 1876, because I was interested in American history, I was able to make it interesting for people who just given up. They just thought they were going to be bored to death because they were bored in school. They were bored in school because everything they were told was untrue. and had been carefully prepared by school boards to make the United States look like the land of Oz. And indeed, it certainly was not. It's an interesting country with an interesting history, good points and bad points. So I would say that with an educational system this bad, we will never get a proper fix on affairs. It will be essentially an elitist country. That's what they were using against George Bush and so on, because he's obviously preppy type from Yale and so on. A background I know, since I come from the same kind of background. These people tend to run the country because nobody else ever gets to know enough. They're able to go to Exeter or to Groton and on to Yale and Harvard and so forth and so on, and they do learn the languages, and that small group does indeed run the place. But I don't think that their interests particularly coincide with that of the rest of the people.
Does someone as sophisticated as you are submit himself to the conspiracy theory of history?
No. I've always said about the Trilateral Commission, which is why I said it's so funny, because I began all this 5 years ago.
They don't conspire.
And then the right wing picked it up, and they think it is, and the far left has taken it. Now, I say they don't have to conspire because they all think alike. I mean, the president of General Motors and the president of Chase Manhattan Bank really are not going to disagree on much of anything. I mean, they react, nor will the editor of the New York Times disagree with them. They all tend to think quite alike. Otherwise, they would not be in those jobs. So.
Well, Gore, let's take some specific events of recent date. The invasion of Afghanistan by the Russians, termed by President Carter the most dangerous issue since World War II.
Well, of course, that's his usual hyperbole. Not only is it not dangerous to our interests, it was one of the best things that has happened to the United States foreign policy in the last 20 years. Instead of the United States being the focus for all the hatred of the Islamic world, the Soviet Union is now sharing that hatred with us. So I would have paid the Soviet to go in. I would have sent them little messages saying, the people of Afghanistan love you. They want to be the Afghan Socialist Republic. Come in. They'll give you flowers. If I were the CIA, I'd be feeding them this kind of information. Then let them get surprised when they get there. I mean, they're going to be there for years, having various parts of their bodies cut off by enraged Afghans. I mean, do not take on an enraged Afghan. I mean, they're just bad news. So to say that this was a great disaster for us is a disaster for the Soviet Union and a great plus for us.
No, he said the worst event since World War II in terms of international policy.
Well, he couldn't say his own election as president, so out of modesty.
All right. Then he discovered a brigade of troops in Cuba.
Oh, gosh.
Which he said was life-threatening.
I know. Cuban imperialism has always terrified me. I mean, the Cubans are on the march. Even as we sit here now, who knows what African countries they're going through? I mean, every cook's tour, they're Cubans, you know, with their guns and their rifles and their machetes fighting their way through the jungles of Africa. They're on the march. We've got an arm against the Cubans. Yeah, we've got enemies everywhere.
You sound like Nixon.
Yeah, I know. I like Nixon.
Can you imitate Carter? When, for example, he is on the phone to somebody saying, tell the Shah to come here from Mexico and have an operation on us.
I can't do that, but what is fascinating, I have never worked on Carter's voice because it's very difficult to do. It isn't just a southern accent. He sings. It's a strange crooning he does. It's kind of like a lullaby, and he kind of drops off at the end of the line. The emphasis is always in the wrong place, which is kind of fascinating. Now, it's like Katharine Hepburn, you know, she always hits the wrong word with great New England force, and it became quite interesting. So he croons, and he's singing to us, and he's lulling us, and he's very effective because of this.
Do you think that permission of the Shah is coming to this country to have his operation at New York Hospital was a wise one in retrospect?
In retrospect, it was not wise. And there's even chat he may be coming back for that long-needed adenoid removal or tonsillectomy or whatever it is now.
Well, they won't let DeBakey operate. Well, they'll let him operate, but the chaps around the table must be Panamanians, and
yes.
DeBakey says he can't do his best work.
I know. Well, DeBakey, these prima donnas. I mean, you show me open heart surgery, and I'll show you a prima donna, the first degree. No, I think everybody is sort of praying that the Shah may join his ancestors on some celestial peacock throne, and we'll be off the hook. But meanwhile, there was the Chase Manhattan Bank, David Rockefeller, and his then alive brother Nelson, and their messenger boy, Henry Kissinger, who's been on the payroll forever, got him in over the better judgment of the CIA, and for once, and of the president as well. So they've got a lot of power.
Were you pained by the way Nelson died?
Well, I wasn't there, David.
No, but you read it somewhere. And
I'm thinking rapidly about which of 35 stories I've heard should I tell, and I don't think I'll tell one.
All right.
But it's awfully funny, some of them. Poor man, I mean, no one's death should ever be regarded with jollity. No. Unless they're terribly rich. Since the rich have everything else, let us have the laugh.
Well, if we've made that kind of mistake in admitting the Shah and then having the embassy seized in Tehran, if we have misjudged the Afghanistan issue, if we've played it wrong in Cuba with the brigade of Russian troops there, what does that suggest about the foreign policy and the foreign policy makers of the current administration?
Well, dumb, but that isn't the point. Why not devote ourselves to my Fourth Republic and begin to worry about the interior of the United States and not the exterior? We've got so much to do here that the idea that foreign policy should always be the diversion, it's the only thing that presidents can do without being stopped by Congress. Presidents have a fairly wide area in which to misbehave. That's why they love foreign affairs. They love taking trips. You know, they have big crowds and they do that in front of them. And this is a great high for presidents, and it does keep them out of mischief at home. That's a plus for foreign policy, but they do make mistakes. Now, if you really had a president who was interested in the interior of the country, educational system, mass transit, cleaning up pollution, rebuilding the cities, there's so much to do. And you could take that military budget, take half of it, and you could do practically anything you wanted with the country. You could even have an educational system, something that is the most un-American proposal I could probably ever make, you know, to have bright children. They don't want that, because bright children might vote them out. Bright children might not perceive that Mr. Rockefeller's interests are their interests. So they're going to keep them as dumb as they can.
Did you read recently that there was a study done? They gave a group of high school seniors a test that high school seniors took in 1928, the same test. And 1980 seniors did abominably. Nowhere near as well as the 1928 seniors.
I don't know if you go around to colleges, which I do occasionally, and I've been doing it off and on for 30 years, and I'm amazed now the difficulty they have talking. Forget reading and writing. I mean, the ability to put forward a thought in a clear order or to ask a question without the ahs and ohs and uhs, you know, these strange noises you get. No, that's rather frightening. I think television has contributed to that, because it's used as a kind of pacifier for babies, and people, it makes you passive, no doubt about that. And I suppose that, well, look what we're doing. We're doing the talking when you should be at home doing the talking with each other. You should be talking about Plato instead of listening to us natter away.
No, I think it's important to listen to you natter. We'll be right back for more nattering.